1239th day of the war. The weapons for Ukraine from the $10 billion package announced to Trump are already in the American warehouses or just produced, New York Times reports. You don't have to wait for deliveries for months this time. Moreover, countries have already been found in Europe and are ready to pay for it. This is at least Germany, Denmark, Sweden, and the Netherlands. There will be no long-range missiles in the package, Trump said. Interestingly, according to the Washington Post and the Financial Times, the American president told Zelensky something completely different and even asked him to hit these missiles on Moscow so that the Russians would feel the pain, and Putin became more talkative. Even without new military aid, the defense force manages to inflict serious losses on Russia. Russian armed forces at the Pokrovske direction, 70–90% of the people in the Zetniks begin to draw the virtual successes of the Russian army, which cannot confirm the pro-Russian geocentrism. And where Russian armed forces is still breaking through, they must meet new defensive borders, which Ukraine has still learned to build. At least this is what the Ukrainian soldier writes. The military going to the Russian army for a long ruble is expected to be disappointed. They are forced to spend most of the salary on elementary supplies, from provisions to generators, which you will not get from the Ministry of Defense. If the Russian contractor does not want to part with the money, then they kill their own people at his place, and if they refuse, they put them in a pit, beat them up, and do all sorts of things. But in the background of the heroes, we have no rest. On Z channels, they tell a heartbreaking story about how the new husband of the ex-wife of the next lieutenant, a DPS employee, organized an ambush on the soldier who came on vacation and a check on alcohol and drugs in order not to let him meet his son. Zetniks don't accept such an attitude towards heroes, not wanting to believe that this has long become the norm. This and much more in today's fresh summary. I write down a little bit about the cold conditions. However, I hope that both in sound and in picture everything is more or less good. You can support the video with your like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. All these actions help promote the video, especially your subscriptions are important for YouTube algorithms. Well, you can also support the channel financially. You can do this on Patreon, the link is in the description. And by buying in VPN, this is a means to bypass blockages, which allows you to bypass blockages, watch YouTube at normal speed, use Twitter, Instagram, Discord, Telegram, which has not yet been blocked, but I am sure that soon, yes. In general, it gives a normal access to the internet. You can buy NVPN by the link in the description. And by buying it, you will also support the release of new videos on this channel. But we are moving on to what happened the past day. The channel, by the way, notes the news that the American weapons that Trump intends to deliver to Ukraine through NATO partners will not have to wait years and even months. New York Times reports that almost all the weapons that NATO will buy from America as a result of the announced deal, the amount is not called, but Axios and Washington Post wrote about $10 billion are ready for immediate sending to Ukraine. They are either already in stock or were recently produced. As for the 17 launchers for Patriot, voiced by Trump, these launchers may be purchased from Switzerland in 2020. So, Batilio writes, then it is clear why Trump, without naming the country, said that she would not need these launchers. Switzerland is considered a neutral country and does not enter NATO. But then I have another question, he writes, how did Switzerland agree to send whole Patriots to Ukraine, if earlier it vetted the re-export of Leopard tanks to Germany, knowing that they were planned to be sent to Ukraine? Batilio is interested. Maybe of course there are some legal nuances, for example, they have not had time to be installed in Switzerland. The manufacture of these systems may take many years, especially considering the demand and queue. Therefore, according to the documents, they are not considered Swiss. In general, more information is needed, recognizes the author of the channel. Meanwhile, many European countries expressed their readiness to participate in Trump's scheme for the purchase of weapons for European funds. After Donald Trump announced that European countries would buy American weapons, first of all, the Patriot anti-aircraft missile complexes, and pass them on to Ukraine, the AFP agency collected comments from countries that declared their readiness to do so. Germany immediately declared this. NATO's Secretary General Mark Rutte called a number of potential leaders of other NATO members in Europe and North America, as well as Canada, Norway, and Great Britain. On Tuesday, Denmark, Sweden, and the Netherlands joined them. Denmark is absolutely ready to take part in the scheme. We need to work on the details, says the foreign minister of the country Lars Eljoch Rasmussen. His Dutch colleague Caspar Veldkamp also stated that his country is considering potential participation in the scheme, leaning towards a positive decision. Swedish Minister of Defense Paul Johnson, in a written statement for the AFP, also stated that Stockholm will make its contribution. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister of the Czech Republic Petr Fiala stated that his country will not participate in the scheme, quotes his website Public CZ, the Czech Republic. It's focused on other projects and ways to help Ukraine, for example, on the initiative on ammunition, said Fila, taking into account the scheme within which the Czech Republic collects funds, finds artillery suppliers all over the world, buys them and transmits them to Ukraine. Zelensky said that he had a very good conversation with Trump. The president of Ukraine said that he called the president of the United States, discussed with Donald Trump the new aid to America for Ukraine in confrontation with Russia. Also, Zelensky talked to NATO Secretary of State Mark Rutte. We appreciate the readiness to provide additional Patriots. For this, America, Germany, and Norway are already working together. There will also be the supply of other weapons to protect the lives of our people and the reflection of Russian assaults, said the president of Ukraine. Zelensky did not give any important news to Trump. It is simply worth noting the tendency that Western leaders, after important negotiations, now call Zelensky and not Putin, since the latter has demonstrated his own non-agreement. But Trump, during one of the talks, called Zelensky to hit Moscow. The author of the Budelia channel collected a shrinkage of information on this issue from 2 different publications. The main headliners, he writes, of the first half of the day were the Washington Post and the Financial Times, which in one voice came out with the inside that Trump offered Zelensky to hit Moscow and St. Petersburg, and even offered to put tomahawks under this case, says Budelia. It was so shocking that even Peskov had to leave, who said that publications in Western media are allegedly often fake. Proposal was voiced during Trump and Zelensky's call on July 4, the next day after an unsuccessful call from Trump and Putin, which the U.S. president described as bad. Trump asked Zelensky, "Vladimir, can you hit Moscow? Can you hit St. Petersburg too?" Zelensky replied, "Absolutely. We can, if you give us weapons." Trump made it clear that he supports the idea to make Russians feel pain and put the Kremlin behind the table of negotiations. At this stage, the supply of tomahawks in Ukraine is still not considered, but they try to stay on the table in case Trump wants to use more levers, writes Washington Post. One of the reasons for the emergence of the topic of tomahawks in the context of Ukraine and Russia is the effectiveness of these missiles during strikes on Iran. If you remember, in addition to the JBU-57 anti-bunker bombs, up to 3 dozen tomahawks of the naval base were launched. Once again, if we see a more daring Trump, do not forget to say thank you to the Israeli pilots for this. While the topic of tomahawks is postponed to the future, the resumption of the strikes on the territory of Russia is currently considered to be an old good attack on the territory of Russia. According to the Washington Post, Ukraine currently has 18 attack missiles. In a package of 10 billion which Europe will buy from the United States for Ukraine, the source of VOPO confirms this amount. The first voiced Exos, additional attack on the CIS may be included. The idea of Ukraine's partners to transfer the war to the Muscovites, the quote, has gradually increased, and in the last week, American officials in private order divided these feelings. After Trump's call with Zelensky, the American side, represented by Kit Kellogg, handed over to Zelensky last week in Rome a potential list of weapons that could be put on the list. There were also long-range systems that could be transferred through the third country. Another reason why, while the Tomahawk is being laid down, Americans are allegedly afraid that Ukraine will not be able to contain itself. They are sort of afraid that Ukraine is right in the Kremlin, or how they are being ironic, and add that not a single case has been known when Ukraine would have abused weapons and violated the word of this America. Trump publicly refuses the words supposedly said to Zelensky. Journalists on the southern shores of the White House asked Trump if he was ready to deliver large-range missiles to Ukraine. Some media mentioned a winged rocket. "No, we are not considering this," Trump said to the AFP. The agency also gives a literal quote to Trump in response to the question of whether Vladimir Zelensky should strike on Moscow. According to the publication in several media, Trump asked about this Ukrainian president, as we discussed above. "No, he should not aim at Moscow," said Trump. In addition, Trump said that he does not lose hope to agree with the Russian president. Putin deceived Trump 4 times, but they still continue to communicate, said the U.S. president in a phone interview. Answering the question about his attitude towards Putin, Trump confirmed that he had repeatedly considered it possible to achieve an agreement with the Russian leader. He said, "Yes, I thought we had an agreement," 4 times. The American president acknowledged his disappointment in the actions of Putin, but emphasized that he finally did not refuse to contact him. Trump explained his feelings as follows. "I am disappointed in him, but no, I did not leave the cross. I'm just disappointed. We were on the verge of a deal 4 times, and then you go home and see that he just hit the house in Kiev." In my opinion, in this context, the call for a blow to Moscow, if he still had a place, should be considered as Trump's desire to make Putin more negotiable, increasing the costs for him in the event of a war. In any case, a possible attack on Moscow would rather be a symbolic gesture and also probably unsuccessful, given the density of the air defense around the Russian capital, where it was pulled to the core by other cities and regions. They should be beaten there in other cities and regions, but in the Ukrainian command, judging by the latest reports about the blows, this is already known much better than me. Well, in general, keep in mind that public policy is a fight of plagues. Many words are spoken not in order for real threats to be carried out, but in order for the other party to think that they can be carried out. This struggle of plagues is very exhausting. Some tell journalists what should scare the other side, the second tells that the other country is impenetrable. But both are just a way of pressing through the media, because at the moment, journalists are ready to write any sensation on one source, forming a sensational headline. That has nothing to do with reality. Here, from the same series, for example, a publication that I, on the contrary, interpret in a reverse way, that is, in my opinion, it indirectly hints at the fact that the threats of Trump work. For me, this is evidenced by the mark of Reiter, which looks like a controllable drain from the Russian administration of the president or close to her circles. Vladimir Putin intends to continue military actions in Ukraine until the West agrees to his terms of peace, writes Reiter. According to the agency, with a reference to 3 sources close to the Kremlin, the economy and the Russian army are strong enough to withstand any additional measures of the West, including the threat of the introduction of the U.S. post in relation to Russian oil buyers. Putin believes that no one seriously discussed the details of peaceful regulation in Ukraine with him, including the Americans, so he will continue military actions until he achieves what he wants, Reiter, one of the sources, said in terms of anonymity. According to the agency's spokesperson, despite several phone conversations between Trump and Putin, as well as visits to Russia from the representative of Steve Witkoff, Putin believes that the detailed world, the peaceful plan, was not discussed. According to the source, Putin is ready to discuss the guarantee of security for Ukraine with the participation of major powers, although it is not yet quite clear how it will work. Second spokesperson of the agency, familiar with the position of the Kremlin, I adore this phrase, familiar with the position of the Kremlin, said that Putin believes that the goals of Moscow are much more important than any potential economic losses from the pressure of the West. According to the sources, Putin does not worry about the threat of the U.S. retaliate against China and India for the purchase of Russian oil. 2 sources of the agency reported that the Russian economy, based on war, surpasses the production of NATO countries, including the United States, on the main types of ammunition, such as artillery shells, and the Russian army has an advantage on the battlefield. And this is not true because everything depends on a particular nomenclature, and Russia mostly buys artillery ammunition from North Korea now. According to Reiter sources, Putin can continue the war until the Ukrainian defense does not collapse and then expand his territorial ambitions, including most of Ukraine. In general, when you see the news based on sources, you need to remember that these are living people. They have their own motives to leak some information. In this case, it looks more like a specially organized launch designed to convince the West in general, and Trump in particular, that the threat of sanctions and the supply of weapons will not stop Putin. Therefore, it is better to agree on his terms. Second question is that if such threats really did not work, we would not have been so stubbornly convinced of their uselessness. In connection with this, it will not be superfluous to remind you that Putin himself has not commented on Trump's ultimatum. Although in principle this is Jansa Reiter. Well, how is it Jansa? Jansa is the wrong word. Listen, I don't think that Reiter was paid to publish this beep. That is, how was it? How does it work for Andrei Pertsev and other beep eaters? They have some sources in the Kremlin, and they don't want to lose them. The sources at the same time understand that everything they say will be printed, nothing will be checked. Additional sources will not be searched. Why? Because in modern media they have enough of one source and the closeness to the body of this source, to the authorities. For them, it is enough to write a loud sensation. It works not only with Russia, it works with America as well. That is, America and the Trump administration actively use this technology to throw in all kinds of beep. Therefore, all these assessments, all these stories about Trump thinks this, about Putin thinks that, this is such a beep. Well, that is just in the empty oil. That is, when the source transmits some, well, especially when there are several of them, they transmit details of some conversations or something else. This is one story. And when your phrase sounds like a source familiar with the course of thought of the Kremlin, a source familiar with the left heel of Putin, thinking that, well, that is, if this is not even a direct quote, that is, it was not Putin who said at the meeting that I do not care about the sanctions of the West, although this will also be. Well, if this does not have any audiovisual confirmation, then it will be worth nothing. Well, this is just a psyop, literally a Kremlin psyop. For the Russian psyop, they use Andrei Pertsev, to whom they drain everything with beep, and 9 out of 10 of what they drain in the end does not come true because they test the public reaction. Through him, in the Western media, they drain in order to convince the West that look, nothing works, we will fight to the last, everything is fine with us, so well that half of the sphere has already been covered. Therefore, I will not urge you not to read this, not to watch it, because I am telling you about it myself. I am telling you again to explain the mechanisms, to make it primitive. Just don't swing around in emotional swings that are based on nothing. That is, these empty things, here you think this, here you think that, forget it at all. And despite, by the way, the three sources stated in this particular article, in fact, on each thesis there is one, that is, a classic one, another controlled Kremlin slip. In pursuit of sensations, again, the Western media, which is eager to access this allegedly surrounding of the Kremlin, is ready to print any beep, basically whatever Putin would not imagine there. Even if this is all true, Russia's ability to fight does not depend on his desire. Over the past 2 months, Russia has not been able to boast of serious breakthroughs, despite the fact that it is conducting the most bloody offensive in its modern history and is carrying huge losses. So desire is not desires, but opportunities are opportunities. I propose Putin to wish in one hand, but to beep in the other, and see how quickly it will fill up. If Putin and others are interested in what will happen on the 51st day of the ultimatum, I would advise you to call Ayatollah. American Senator Graham threatened Russia with a repeat of the fate of Iran if the Kremlin ignores Trump's ultimatum. U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham commented on Donald Trump's statement on the 50-day term for the ceasefire in Ukraine. According to Graham, 100% of the sanctions against countries that buy cheap Russian net will cause a serious blow to the Russian economy. You can ask yourself a question. What about the Lindsey Graham bill that was supposed to impose sanctions on Russia? Why is he not upset because the bill is dead? I published an answer to this question on my Telegram channel yesterday. It's called Nacke. Sometimes when I'm inspired, I write something. Subscribe if you want to get my opinion on a particular issue more quickly. So what did I write there? The legislation of Lindsey Graham and the company around him have done their job brilliantly. I insist on this. It has repeatedly emphasized that he is strange from the point of view of legislation. Well, because he gives Trump authority that he already has. Graham's task was to impose Trump's administration on the idea of sanctions against Russia. And he succeeded. It can be discussed for a long time whether it is possible to theoretically impose sanctions, presenting a complete embargo on China, India, and Brazil. But the fact is that now this is not a senator's rhetoric. This is the rhetoric of the President of the United States, and in the form of an ultimatum. Trump's ultimatum can also be treated differently, but we have one in Anamnes, which was embodied in life, on which Graham refers to the ultimatum of Iran for 60 days. Moreover, the parameters were the same. Go to the deal, otherwise there will be consequences. On the 61st day, the consequences came. True, not from the United States, from Israel, and whose weapon did Israel use? The same. So the common one is much more than it seems. In general, Graham achieved his goal, for which he has a low bow. Then it's Trump's turn, which of course is always unpredictable. But the fact is that the American president did not want to threaten Russia with any sanctions, using common words and unclear terms. But the company of Graham's pressure, with the involvement of more and more senators, worked. And now Donald Trump actually says that he is holding an embargo on trade with countries that will buy Russian cheap oil in 50 days. Whether this will happen or not is a matter of course. But Graham, in my opinion, did everything he could. But his bill really doesn't make sense in today's reality because Trump could have done it himself. Well, that is, no bill was needed for this. But Trump, America, we must not forget that the main opportunity for Ukraine to preserve itself, defend itself from fascists and occupiers, defend its relatives and loved ones, these are Ukrainian troops. Thank you very much for clicking to the meeting, and now we have already collected more than half, although the meeting is quite large. Let's go further. We continue to collect for the 93rd Brigade. Here is their message to you. It is not possible to work now in an open area. We often have to renew the equipment because all the equipment that is on the surface, almost everything is lost. It is necessary to go out again, set everything up, adjust it, renew it. Previously, we lost through artillery fire. Now most of it is from the operation of FPV drones. Due to the fact that something did not work, whether an antenna or a wire or a generator, it is always the explosion of combat work. If we do not close these needs today, then tomorrow we will just lose a lot of guys, a lot of territories, cities, which will then all the same need to be refurbished. Therefore, it is better to do it now and hold off the enemy from this riot than later to lose the lives of people. We are military officers of the Battalion of Unmanned Systems of the 93rd Brigade, Kholodny Yar. We appeal to the blogger Michael Nacke and his community for help in supporting the assembly to purchase strategically important elements for the supply of combat positions of the Drone Brigade. Your support is an important component of our security and quality performance of military tasks. Together we will necessarily win. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. As always, cinematically, here is a QR code for Monobank. In the description there is a link to Mono, PayPal, private, all types of cryptocurrencies. In general, this is a real way to help in this war, here and now, to help Ukrainian defenders, to save their lives, to save the lives of relatives and loved ones, to save the lives of all of Ukraine. Therefore, the support of the Ukrainian troops is one of the few things that we can really do with you in order to influence the war here and now and help save lives. Well, we're moving on. Another raid of Ukrainian drones on Russian territory brought its fruits. Astra sources confirmed an attack on the energy plant in Yeltsin, Lipetsk region. The roof of one of the workshops in the administrative building of the factory worker was damaged. At least 4 unmanned aircraft hit the energy plant in the city of Yeltsin on July 15. Astra found out. Another BPL was shot down with the help of a helicopter of the Russian Defense Ministry. As a result of the attack, the roof of one of the workshops of the factory was lit up. The roof of an administrative building was also damaged. An employee of the enterprise was wounded. Earlier, Astra published footage of a fire in the shelter after the BPA attack. Smoke was seen in the area of the energy plant. In early July, at the territory of the energy plant in the shelter of the Lipetsk region, at least 12 unmanned aerial vehicles fell. Astra also wrote that the plant was already attacked at night on May 23. As a result of the attack, one of the workshops was lit up. 9 workers were injured. Power Energy Plant specializes in the production of chemical power sources. The production of the plant is widely distributed in various sectors, including the defense industry, civil aviation, sea transport, and energy complex. In addition, on the night of July 15, Voronezh was attacked by one of the largest air attacks since the beginning of the war. Unmanned vehicles fell on a residential 5-story building a few hundred meters from the government building in the Voronezh region and a multi-story building in the Komentarnovsky district. The building of the kindergarten was damaged and 27 people were injured. According to the Telegram channel Osvidomidal, one of the drones crashed into a residential building, probably as a result of the impact of the rep funds, and the other one fell in the yard nearby. The only thing that can be advised here is not to ignore the signals of air alarm, since a crashed or crushed drone can get anywhere. In the absence of a shelter, hide in bathrooms and corridors. Remember, there are 2 walls. There should be at least 2 walls between you and the street. And the second one will at least be able to stop the fragments that flew from the first one. Russia continues to terrorize the prefrontal territories of Ukraine along with large cities. 2 people died in Donetsk region in a day, another 11 were injured, the local authorities reported. A total of 18 shelling was recorded in a day. 224 people were evacuated from the prefrontal territories, including 25 children, wrote the head of OVA Vadim Filishkin. 2 people died in Kherson region in a day and 18 were injured, the local authorities also told. Many buildings, private houses, farm buildings, agricultural machinery, ambulance cars, and private transport were damaged, said the chief Alexander Prokudin. In conflict intelligence teams, which collects information about shelling with the help of volunteers, or rather collects information with the help of volunteers about shelling, they published a chronicle of 1 day of safaris of people in Kherson, according to the messages of the local authorities. 1 day from the life of Kherson, July 14, 5.4 as a result of the attack of the BOPLA in the Dniprovsky district. 56-year-old civilian received mine explosive injuries and shrapnel injuries of his leg. At 6 a.m. in the morning, 57-year-old woman received a mine explosive injury and a shrapnel injury to her neck. At 11 a.m. in the Dniprovsky district, as a result of the attack of the BOPLA, 2 men aged 75 and 57 received explosive injuries and shrapnel injuries. At 11.5, 2 men aged 71 and 46 were injured in the shelling of the Central District, as well as 57-year-old women. Administrative buildings and the House of Culture were damaged. At 12.15 in the Dniprovsky district, a 40-year-old civilian was injured after the shelling of the BOPLA. At 13.3 in the Dniprovsky district, a 59-year-old man died as a result of the shelling of the BOPLA. 3 men, 57, 54, and 60, were injured during another drone attack in Dniprovsky district. 14.5 in the Central District, a 67-year-old woman received an explosive injury as a result of the attack of the BOPLA, as well as a shrapnel wound on her face and neck. At 19.05, a woman died as a result of a drop of ammunition from the BOPLA in the Dniprovsky district, 65 years old. Also in the evening, as a result of a drop of ammunition on a civilian car in the Dniprovsky district, a 30-year-old civilian received a mine explosion injury and a shrapnel wound on his face. It should be noted that the vast majority of the injured are elderly people who usually do not leave the settlements under shelling, because they either do not want to leave their usual places or do not have the means to find housing in the rear. Russian drone operators in the meantime hunt old people without any conscience, while at the same time, I repeat, clearly seeing that they are hitting civilians and committing military crimes. When you hit the stop, you see who is there. When you drop the drone ammunition on the car, you see what you drop it on. Therefore, yes, this is a safari for the people. This is really an absolutely conscious decision of the Russian drone operators to attack just ordinary civilians. In the deep state, they noted the progress of Russian armed forces in the area of the settlement of Ryazino on the eastern flank of the Pokrovske direction. There is a rather threatening situation there. Russians are approaching the logistics route of the Pokrovsko-Mirnograd agglomeration, passing through Rodinskaya to the north of Mirnograd. I hope that the Ukrainian command will adequately assess the current situation and will be able to stabilize this area. Ukrainian military officer Stanislav Bunyatov characterizes the situation in the following way. At the Pokrovsko-Konstantinovsky direction and towards the admin border of the Dnipropetrovsk region, the Rashists continue to push, throwing infantry, light automobile equipment, and motorcycles. Every day, tough guys destroy 70–90% of two-legged vehicles and hold positions, but the movement of Russian armed forces is still there. The reasons for this are clear to everyone. Just in case, I will clarify that among the reasons, it is most often called a lack of a personal component of the OSU. A lack of means of defeat, in the first place drones, unorganizedness, lack of interaction between neighboring units, and periodically false reports that the Ukrainian Defense Force continues to hold some positions, which creates a perverse understanding of the situation at the front. This is all that the Ukrainian military described more than once. Meanwhile, the Russians continue to strike on Ukrainian logistics in the Dobropoli region, which is an important transport hub for the Pokrovsky and neighboring Turetsky directions. In one of the local publics, the footage was published with the Ukrainian heat wave, which struck the Russian FPV drones near Dobropoli almost 30 km from the front line. The only way out here is to strike on the operators of Russian drones. Moreover, it is enough to just get them, as they wrote in Deep State. For strikes at such a depth, Russian drone operators should be on the front line, almost in the trenches, along with the infantry. In the Donetsk region, the Deep State marks the occupation of the Bogaders, as well as the promotion in the Novohatsky and Tolstoy and Alexeyevka districts. Zetniks also write a lot about the promotion in this region, but just from there came another explanation why I use their messages with great indignation. In the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, they announced the capture of the Voskresenka settlement on the border with the Dnipropetrovsk region. Zet channel in the UNDV published a video flagged Voskresenka and declared control over this settlement. At the same time, the pro-Russian ASIN project Beef Caprice was unable to publicize this video and confirmed that it really was filmed on Sunday. Post Beef Caprice was deleted, they wrote. It was not possible to establish the scene in accordance with the demonstration of the flags and the general angles provided by the source, the authors of the project wrote. In general, there are no claims about the geolocation of the Beef Caprice, so they are more likely to be right about it. But it should be noted that the ZT Sintra ran ahead of the locomotive here. At first, they wrote about the capture of the Beef Caprice without checking the geolocation, and then the post had to be deleted. In addition, the Beef Caprice is guilty of repainting the territory with the first appearance of Russian military there, and then it periodically has to be repainted, when it turns out that the Russian group was destroyed and the Ukrainians restored their positions. Therefore, even pro-Russian assinters, or rather, assinters who are pro-Russian, that is, those who act on the geolocation of specific areas of the front, should not be trusted because of the rather free interpretation of the data. At the junction of the Zaporizhzhia and Zhendonskoye directions, the website fixes the progress of the Russians in Malinovka. It should be noted that this channel was taken just yesterday, but we have just remembered the value of their messages. Nevertheless, it is not possible not to note once again that the Russians are trying to press on all possible areas of the front, which leads to a stir in the Ukrainian reserves, but at the same time is covered with huge losses. Why is this happening? I told you in a recent video. In Ukraine, they solved the problem with the fortifications, at least partially. Let me remind you that there were many complaints earlier about the fact that the engineering and fortification structures are either not being built at all or are being built, but without taking into account the terrain and experience of the modern war. So, if you believe in the Ukrainian military, the situation is changing somewhat. In particular, this is what Stanislav Bunyatov writes. In the Kramatorsk direction, they began to dig up good lines of defense, pleasantly surprised. With the right approach to the organization of the work of the BPA crews, not a single orc and not a single tank will pass. The only thing that is missing is rapid scaling, he writes. I fully agree, his colleague, the author of the Telegram channel Officer, adds. Where in the engineering structures in Donetsk, constant work and movement in the right direction are visible. EGAS, RVA, NASAP, and so on, all this in several lines, which in principle creates a normal obstacle for mechanized or motor storm attacks. The only thing I would add is not to hammer a bolt on the covers and other protective covers, which should be carefully masked, because such things will later become relevant first for ground units, then for drones, possibly for infantry, but only if the masking is really perfect. Otherwise, I didn't really see such things, or maybe it's just well masked, the officer ironicizes. OSINT researcher Jump, having analyzed new satellite images of Russian base storages and armored vehicles, noted new activity on them. He believes that it is related to attempts by the Russians to start restoring T-72A tanks, says Jump's analyst Galvin. Previously, these tanks were restored in small quantities. The main sources of the loss were T-72B and T-80, but their reserves were exhausted. Jump noted that the T-72A bases are on average in poor condition, and the Russians apparently move them from place to place as part of the sorting process. According to earlier calculations, there were 1142 T-72 tanks on the Russian bases, both versions of the T-72A and an even older T-72 Ural, but all of them were related to the categories of poor and very poor technical condition. It makes no sense to go to the Russian army for money, since they will still have to spend almost all of them in conditions of lack of supply from the Ministry of Defense. And a Russian military officer recorded a video in which he debunked the myth of big earnings on the SVO. He told how much money is actually earned and what for. According to him, products, equipment, and even fuel, almost everything the soldiers buy themselves. From backpacks and cigarettes to generators, oil, gasoline and spare parts, even canisters to go to your account. The only help comes only from volunteers. No full-fledged supply from the Ministry of Defense goes unnoticed. So I went to the store, bought a box of Chernigolovka, a bag of potatoes, a bag of stuff with kopecks, a backpack for a guy asked me to buy. A backpack like this costs 3,000 rubles. There are 7 kopecks for energy, 2 packs. Of cigarettes, I would like to buy a light bulb in the store. There is a lot of coffee on the table. I bought 10 chili sauces here. We buy napkins, we are lucky, we are collected with napkins, thank you very much. Phones are constantly broken, lost in power banks, the same thing is constantly bought with them. In addition, generators, gasoline, diesel are bought, these canisters are bought, the canisters themselves were bought, found, bought. Fuel, gasoline is bought, here, fuel, generator, fuel, generator. They work silently. In addition, spare parts for technology, gasoline, oil. The vehicles need to be kept clean and orderly in order for it to work. Well, then the driver will understand. So about going here to earn money, well, please come and earn, try. Batteries, everything is the same, everything is at its own expense. We've been buying at our own expense for a long time. The soldier also noted that you can earn much more on a civilian vehicle and at the same time be safe, not risking your life every day. Even if the Russian military does not want to part with the money earned on the blood, they often do not have much choice. The soldier revealed a cruel criminal scheme of commanding the 9th Separate Motorized Shooting Brigade. If you do not find the money in the near future, I will be killed. Military officer Yuramev Alexander, born in 1991, serving in the 9th Separate Motorized Shooting Brigade, Military Unit 71443, was sacrificed by the commanders. To his wife, he said that after a while, after the arrival in the location of Alexander, he was in the pit, where he kept many fighters at the same time regularly beating them. He was sitting in the pit all this time. There were still boys sitting with him. They were beaten every day with batons, with armor, and money was knocked out of them. You can get out of the pit only after you pay 1,000,000 rubles. At the same time, those who paid are forced to write a report on the voluntary release of money for the needs of the brigade, so that there is no evidence of crime. They are forced to write these reports, which is allegedly not under pressure. According to the wife of Alexander, he spent 2 days in the pit, being free after help from a guy who had recently returned from the hospital and was also beaten. He paid $1 million for my husband and paid for himself. After being forced to beat the fighters, they tried to turn to the collective complaints for the lawlessness of command. But in the end, an unknown officer came to them, with whom the dissatisfied were taken to the square and were significantly humiliated and beat. This is the boy who wanted to write a complaint. They put a skirt on him, put on a bulletproof vest, and wrote incendiary words on his bulletproof vest. They beat him right in the forehead. In order to avoid punishment for what was happening in the pit, a strict ban on the use of mobile phones was introduced in the unit. When Alexander tried to give his wife a complaint about what was happening, he was detained by the military prosecutor's office and sent to the pit again. At the same time, a large amount of money was demanded from him again for getting out of it. And they also said to give another $1 million and said that he would not see any of his salaries and that he came here to work for them. The woman asks the competent authorities to immediately intervene in the situation and to cross the limit of what is happening in the 9th Motorized Shooting Brigade. But of course, this will not happen. As always, everything will be lowered on the brakes. In general, there is absolutely no way out except for desertion. While the command of the 9th Brigade is engaged in exorbitant activities, the units of this brigade are suffering heavy losses. The channel Do Not Wait for Good News has become known that the losses of the 3RD Rifle Battalion, the 9th Separate Rifle Brigade, exceeded 160 people in less than a month, and this number continues to grow every day. One of the battalion officers provided a list of losses in the unit. The document covers a period of almost 30 days, but this is enough to understand the scale of the losses. During this time, the unit lost more than 160 people. To understand, the composition of the battalion includes only a few hundred people, up to 300 people according to the Russian pre-war states. Now this number could change towards an increase, but not much. Losses are recorded almost every day, 5 to 7, and sometimes even 10 people in one day. At the same time, it is important to understand that these figures are low. Many cases are not officially signed according to the direct order of command. Notes Good News: killed 24 are recorded in daily losses, wounded 65, prisoner 1, missing without 64 in the event of a self-reliant status. Part 9. The main reasons for the loss are artillery strikes and drone attacks in kamikaze, as well as the drop of ammunition from the BPA. Regular cases are noted when you were wounded or missing after sending to combat missions, without proper coordination and basic reconnaissance. According to the information of the personnel, the key responsibility for what is happening is carried by the head of the battalion's headquarters, Major Makarov Artem. It is he who, as one of the main officials, is responsible for planning all operations. But as you know, in any brigade, in any unit, this is not some kind of personal story. That is, in order for Russia to be able to move forward at least somehow, it leads people into local assaults. And in local assaults, there are very high losses with which you can't do anything. So this is a basic installation in all troops, and I will give you examples almost every day from completely different units, completely different brigades, completely different battalions. There is the same picture everywhere. And the asses once again found that their favorite heroes of the SVO in the rear do not put anything on and mock at them in every way. Another storm of anger was caused by the post of ex-Red Hat in Yana Pokrovskaya, who told the following urgently about the heroes of the SVO and their attitude to them. Self-government of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. When the military commander broke out of the combat zone to see his son, I deliberately hid the real surname and military name, and I am ready to provide the official organ, but I published the name of the employee. So Vladimir, having military merits and injuries, goes on a business trip to the Voronezh region. He has time to take his son for a day, walk, talk, find out about his success in school, and come back to the front again. Vladimir was divorced, his ex-wife, his new husband. The usual situation is that day, and in the place where the ex-wife was supposed to meet to convey the son, Vladimir suddenly slows down the DPS crew and presses on the subject of alcohol and drugs. Vladimir managed to inform his commander about the detention. Perhaps that is why all the tests turned out to be really negative and not rigged. It could have been different. What turned out, one of the employees of the DPS, the new husband of his former wife, a fighter who was against communicating with his father before he knew about the upcoming meeting, he deliberately arranged a raid on a veteran. According to local publics, this is a lieutenant of the DPS, the head of Konstantin Vasilievich. To great disappointment of the head, Vladimir was completely clean because, in principle, he does not consume alcohol or drugs. The veteran had to be released, but the moment of the meeting with the child was ruined by this incident. Then Pokrovskaya asks to sort it out, punish and not to allow, and ends the post like this. No one dares to discredit the heroes, interfere in their personal lives, deprive them of communication with the wounded, with their own children if there is no appropriate judicial decision. No one knows when the war is over, they will be able to come home from the front again, and if they have the opportunity to meet with their own son at least once a year, then they must be the last pig to prevent this overflowing pretext with the unjustified use of the official position. Well, to be honest, on the other hand, if you don't give your so-called wife and children to the participants, they will definitely not kill them and will not strangle them, so I don't see any drawbacks, and in this sense, I understand both the woman and her new husband perfectly, because Russian military are PTSD fascists and killers, who, I think, have already managed to prove to everyone that these are simply dangerous people in the civilian life, who must be avoided at any cost. Therefore, it is difficult to judge a DPS employee and his wife who do not want such a person to be next to their son. But in general, Russian reality is some kind of endless movie Gruz 200, and the end of this is completely invisible. Well, Michael Nacke was with you, and see you soon. All the best, bye.